All right, so here we are. Um, my name is Greg. I'll do a proper introduction in a little bit, but first I'll introduce the orientation itself. We'll go around, we'll hear who's on the call. By way of introduction of myself, I'll tell a little bit of the backstory of where the Open Referral Initiative came from and what our strategic framework is, talk a little bit about how it's developed so far and what's happening now and where things are going to be heading. And we'll have some time for questions and hopefully sometimes actually talk about how the issue of community resource directory data and the goal of open data and open platforms might be relevant to your particular communities. So with that said, if you would go ahead and introduce yourself, say who you are, what organization you're working with, how you found out about this. If you have questions that can help structure our agenda right off the top, anything you want to know in particular, go ahead and shout it out, or enter it into the chat box on the right hand here, and that'll help me shape the agenda moving forward. So I'll go ahead and just call y'all out, have you give introductions from left to right, at least on my screen. Carrie, are you able to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, can you hear me?
Yep.
Oh, awesome. So I am an attorney with a legal services program in Chicago, LIF. For anybody who knows legal services, I'll just say really briefly that we're the LSC-funded entity in Cook County. For those of you who don't know, that really doesn't matter. We do civil legal services, not crim law. And I work in the public benefits unit. I direct that unit, and so we help people get enrolled and also maintain and avoid termination of their public benefits. And I heard about you guys through both our IT director and through a community member who's been working on a project to help just sort of regular folks assess their public benefits eligibility. Eligibility is really complicated for public benefits, and she's developing a simple tool that people in the community can use to see whether it's worth it to put in a full application.
Is that Rose at Emerleaf? Is that correct?
It is Rose at Emerleaf, yeah.
Great. Okay, so I'll actually chat that into the box. We have a little piece on our blog about that particular project, and we can talk about it later. It's a great example of what it is that we're trying to do. Okay, Gwendolyn.
Yeah, I'm the Director of Technology Development at Illinois Legal Aid Online. We are a statewide organization based in Chicago. We actually work with LIF a lot. That is responsible for the statewide legal aid website, which delivers information referrals to low-income individuals. We are starting a project right now or have been working on it for a couple of months, to rebuild our statewide website. And in doing that, we're looking at the Open Referral Standard as sort of a framework for how we're going to categorize all of the organizations that are within our website.
Great. Nicole, are you able to chime in, let us know who you are, how you came here? I haven't heard from Nicole yet, so she might be having technical difficulties. Rose, you introduced yourself briefly before, but please go ahead, share again for the rest of us. Thank you.
All right, hi. Sorry, I am a software developer at Zendesk in San Francisco, and we have a volunteering organization there that created an application called LinkSF for helping homeless people to find resources in their city. And it's an open source project that is being reproduced in other cities across the country. And so because it's going to be used by different people, we are looking into ways to normalize the type of data that we'll be able to consume with it.
Great. And Russ, I see you just joined us. If you're able to, tell us a little bit about who you are, how you found this, and any questions you might have. Is that Russ Clegg? While we're waiting for Russ, I just heard from Nicole in the chat box on the right. By the way, if you're not able to see the chat box, let me know, because I'll be pasting links into there. And Nicole just told us that she's with 211 in Tompkins and Cortland and doesn't have a mic. 211 in Tompkins, I'm looking that up now. Whereabouts are you, Nicole? Let's see. Oh, is that Orlando? No, New York City. All right, okay.
Ithaca.
Not New York City, New York State, Ithaca. Gotcha. Nicole, I actually have, there's a guy named Jeff Peastrack in Cornell. Maybe you heard about this from him, but we'll have to follow up after because he's been really active in our forum, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. Cool. I haven't heard from Russ, but I'm going to go ahead and get us started. And by way of introduction for myself, my name is Greg Bloom. I started working on this problem, the Community Resource Directory data problem, actually like 5 years ago when I was managing communications for an organization called Bread for the City in the District of Columbia. Bread for the City does a lot of different kinds of services. They also receive about 20,000 people a year who they really just refer elsewhere. And their social workers keep a pretty strong database of services that they provide to people through their intake and referral process. They do this manually just because they're one of the largest organizations. They're very well trusted. They have some type A social workers on staff. They built their own resource database and access like 5 years ago, 10 years ago. Many other organizations came to us asking for that information over the course of my stint there as communications person. And I came to sort of learn about this issue that way, came to learn about how this is very hard to keep track of information about services because it's changing all the time and it's not necessarily reported in any particular way, and that this information is really valuable, important, both for people looking for services and also for service providers trying to connect people to services, and also for people trying to do analysis of community health, unmet needs, that sort of thing. And so over years, we observed that there were many different projects to compile directory information about services, and none of them were really sustainable in and of themselves. But our hypothesis was that if there was some means of sharing the burden of producing and maintaining this information, there were enough resources out there in our community that we would be able to have open, quote-unquote, open data that everyone could use. Over the course of a couple years, learning about the history of this problem, I came to see that there was a clear pattern of people trying to build the one database that would be the best that everyone would use, and it doesn't tend to work out very well. And it really doesn't work out if you try to get everybody to use the same interface, because people have different needs, and people also like control over their own systems. And we identified that there is another way to get the same, to achieve the same objective of enabling people to share the same data, rather than forcing everyone or trying to, to convince everyone to use the same database. We could enable systems to talk to each other, enable data about services to be circulated among organizations that are able to speak the same language. That doesn't mean they'd have to be structured the same way internally, but if they could publish information about the services that they have in the same language and read from that language, then we could achieve the objective of comprehensive information, reliably produced, sustainably produced, through new means. And that, that all sounded nice and good, but for a couple of years when we were talking about this, we realized that, the prospect of developing a data standard that all these organizations that already structure their data in different ways would use, it didn't seem like a very likely undertaking politically. And that changed suddenly about 1.5 years ago when Google, through a consortium of search engines called schema.org, I'll type that into the box, schema.org. Google produced a schema. Basically, they said, here's a structured data language for civic services, saying this is how they want information about services to be marked up on the web, sort of like HTML. if you're familiar with how you code websites. Basically tags saying this bit of data indicates that this is referring to an organization, or this is referring to a service that the organization provides, and this is the contact information, and so on and so forth. Google basically says any web page that marks their data up with this language, our web crawlers, all of the search engines' web crawlers will understand this as rich, structured information, and even eventually be able to deliver search results to people who are searching for things that might not actually contain the text that's there on the service's description or whatever, but the algorithms that the web engines use, the search engines use to sort of guess what people are really looking for, they would be more effective at delivering results. So if people are searching hungry or a place to stay, they might get food pantries or homeless shelters. As structured information at the top of those search results, sort of like when you search for a movie, you see not just the link to the promotional website for the movie, but you actually see the cast and reviews and showtimes, and you're able to buy tickets. And so Google was basically saying, this is where we want the web to go. This is called the Civic Services Schema, specifically. It's part of the World Wide Web Consortium's data standards now. It's a de facto web standard, and that was our opportunity that we seized on to say, okay, now that the web is going in this direction, there's a de facto standard for how to publish this data on a web page. There's an existing standard for structuring resource directory data for exchange between 211 systems, which some of you may be familiar with, and Nicole works for one. But that standard is really just designed for 211 systems to exchange data between themselves, and not necessarily to interact with any existing system. And so our proposal from the start of Open Referral, which is about now a year in, was that we should develop a format that would be interoperable, compatible with the existing standard for structuring 211 information for information and referral providers, and also compatible with this new emerging web standard for structuring data on the web. And the Open Referral format, technically known as the Human Services Data Specification, sort of emerged from that conversation. Specifically, I was facilitating this conversation, having done this organizing in DC in partnership with the 211 and Bread for the City, there where we started. We brought in Code for America, which had a fellowship team who had developed a sort of open platform for sharing this information in San Mateo County. And a number of vendors and practitioners of information and referral, and people who consult on interoperability among human service systems, as well as representatives from Google and other organizations. We convened the Open Referral community group. I sort of put forth our mission, our vision, all of those founding documents, and we formed a number of pilot projects where we would have lead stakeholders, including some combination of organizations that provide referrals on a day-to-day basis, government champions, locally invested funders, and civic technology groups, where they would essentially work together to identify how do we want to use this format to exchange data to meet the needs of the members of our community. Identifying, like the idea of the pilots is that they would identify specific use cases for exchanging resource directory data between systems automatically. That would enable them to meet very real short-term needs while creating the context for a conversation about how these systems should work in the future. And with the eye towards finding new answers to the old question of how are we going to maintain the production of this information, given that it changes often and it really needs to be validated by human labor, people really checking in and making sure that it's correct. Given that reality, our hypothesis is that a common format that all these different systems can recognize makes it possible to answer that question in new ways. It doesn't in and of itself answer the question. We're not building a new system that's going to solve everybody's problems. We're saying here's a common language. Here are some tools that you can use to move data around, to put up a simple website, whatever it may be, and we can help you put these pieces together and find new ways to meet these needs, these complex needs. So that's a very brief overview. I can talk a little bit more about like the technology components, trying to keep it simple. I can talk a little bit more about the pilot projects and how they're going to work. And I can also answer some questions. But I just threw a lot of information out there at y'all, so I'd like to go around and hear. And I can just keep a list of any comments and questions that y'all have before I jump back into talking at more length about some of the nitty-gritty here. Does anybody want to go first? You can also type your question into the comment box over here on the right.
Hey, Greg, can you hear me?
Yes.
This is Jeff. I heard you mention me earlier. I was on, but wasn't able to communicate with you. I just wanted to introduce myself, and maybe this could provide sort of a next step for our discussion today. I'm interested in this data standard and how it might connect out beyond the immediate service providers that you're working with. And in particular, I'm working with a group of organizations across the Northeast U.S. that's interested in food-related data. So, for instance, hunger we have a lot of different organizations working on that. Not all of them are hooked in with the 211 system, but your data standard might provide some sort of lingua franca for us to exchange data in our system. So just wanted to introduce myself.
Thanks, Jeff. Jeff's been occasionally active in our forum, and I think brought up an important point that I can talk a little bit more about in a minute, which is what is actually in our standard? What does it consist of when we talk about a data format? What does that actually consist of, and how does it work? So I can talk a little bit about that. Does anybody else have questions? Carrie asks about the pilot project, so I can talk about that as well. Anybody else? Okay, so for now I'll talk about the what is actually in our standard, how did we develop it so far, and then how our pilot projects are working. So the Open Referral format, technically known as the Human Service Data Specification, I'm going to include a link to the document where it currently is in version 1.0 in the chat bar here. If you haven't seen it, you can also find it through the website. So this basically is a pretty technical document that includes a set of, basically like a model. And that model consists of A, a set of terms and their definitions, B, a framework to show their logical relationships, the relationships between these information elements, and then C, instructions for how to actually structure data and package it and publish it on the web. In a predictable way. And the idea is that this is like a lingua franca or an interlingua. It's like a common language. And specifically, it's pretty narrow in scope. It's defining the elements related to information about organizations, the services that they provide, and the locations that those services are offered at, virtual or physical or whatnot. It doesn't specify anything about personal information. It doesn't specify anything about the process of making a referral or working with a person or bringing somebody into a system. It's just the factual information about services. It also doesn't even include a specific taxonomy of different types of services or different types of eligibility criteria, because all that information is very variable, as we know. Different kinds of organizations and different sectors use different kinds of taxonomies. So what we've done is essentially say this is a common language based on what we're hearing from the field, what we're seeing from different kinds of databases, and just general conventions of how data is structured on the web, just for the information about what a service is, where it's located, and how to access it. And the idea is that this is then this is structured in a way that's very easy for organizations, systems to publish data in this format and to consume data from this format. It's in CSV, comma separated values, which, without getting very technical, the idea is that this is something that someone with a modicum of technical skill, even a spreadsheet program, could open, edit it, and save it and publish it. That's the idea, is to make it as accessible as possible. Although, as I mentioned before, it's also designed to be translatable into more structured specifications, such as the Alliance of Information and Referral Systems. So to loop back to what Jeff was saying earlier, this is designed from a perspective of health, human, social services, case management, food pantries, medical clinics, and so on and so forth. But if you're able to say, this organization, say a farmer's market, provides this service, say cooking classes or EBT transactions. If you're able to represent that activity in this format, then you can share that data in a way that 211 systems could bring in and automatically use, or web engines might automatically recognize on the web as being structured, rich information, so on and so forth. Now, the way we've developed this specification was by bringing different types of users from different perspectives, whether they be people in 211 systems or in community anchor organizations that don't have a formal information and referral practice, but still play a critical role in their communities, as well as like people with experience in standards and so on. And we had a number of different rounds of articulating what is the important information based on our research that we're doing in different ways. What's the information that's absolutely necessary to know about an organization and its service? What's pretty important? What's what should be included but isn't actually like necessary in all circumstances? And how should we structure this in a way that's closely reflects reality and also is easy for people and computers to use. And it's most certainly a work in progress. What we have right now is version 1.0. It's like a beta. It will continue to be improved over time, although at the moment we're stepping back from it and saying we want different organizations to use it, see what works, demonstrate what's valuable, identify things that we might want to change in the future. And the current plan is to collect that feedback and make another revision actually next year, early 2016. So that we're giving folks enough time to take this and use it and learn how it works and really wrap their heads around it, rather than continuing to change it very often like we did in 2014. So that's a quick overview of the specification. Before I talk about the pilot projects and how they're working, I just wanted to pause and see if anybody has questions about this pretty technical issue. I tried to keep it simple, but sometimes it does get pretty complex and hard to understand. So please go ahead and ask any questions you might have about it. You can type them in or just chime in. Okay. Well, since I'm not hearing any, although you're welcome to chime in, we can share like a live example of how this is working. So I shared this link up thread. This was a blog post that we put up on openreferral.org a couple months ago. Purple Binder is an organization in Chicago that they sell software to case managers, healthcare institutions, that enables them to organize the kinds of services that they tend to refer people to, and have that information on hand in a easy to use interface, rather than having to use actually a list on paper or having to search Google or whatever. This is software that Purple Binder develops to make it easier for service providers to provide referrals to services. Someone mentioned that mRelief is an application that enrolls people in benefits. In that same community, this is an application that does something very, very different. It helps people screen themselves for benefits, and thanks to this format that we've developed, Purple Binder is using the Open Referral format to enable its data to be accessed by mRelief, this third-party application, in real time. So mRelief consumes, so a person enters their information into the application according to all these questions that that they put into their screening process, and then the application, if you're not eligible for food stamps, the application will still query Purple Binder's database and return you results based on your situation for services that might help you meet needs, your needs. And so mRelief is able to make use of the data that's in Purple Binder's system automatically. They don't need to export and transform and load that data and then have to maintain a separate copy of it. They don't need to send somebody out to another web page. It's a seamless experience so that users of mRelief can benefit from the labor that Purple Binder puts into maintaining that information, and generally, the user benefits, and now mRelief and Purple Binder are exploring how is this actually in each party's self-interest to sustain that relationship over time, and that's all made possible by the fact that mRelief now is able to recognize this data language that we've developed in partnership with Purple Binder, and in any other community in the country where someone is publishing data in this format, mRelief is now able to redeploy their application there and offer the same feature to those users. So that's a great demonstration of what we want to make possible through the use of a common language, a common data language. I'm sort of glossing over some details like the use of application programming interfaces, APIs, which y'all may have a little bit of understanding of, but I don't want to get too technical without first getting specific questions. So I can talk a little bit more about pilot projects and how they're working. Anybody have questions for me before I jump into the next subject?
Yeah, I was looking at the logical model picture. And I was wondering if you could explain what the notation is on that picture.
That's a great question that let's follow up offline.
Okay.
Because that's I'm personally not a super technical person. I'm learning some things as I go.
Okay.
But there's a lot of very specific notations in there that if we don't have the answer to it, we can ask our lead developer for that.
Sounds good.
And yeah, cool. So yeah, I can talk a little bit about the pilot projects and how they're working. So right off the bat, we're trying to develop a new standard, an open standard that's easy for people to use, that's free to use, and that's interoperable with different kinds of systems. But we weren't going to just do that by getting a bunch of people around the table and making all the decisions and just coming out with it and say, here's our standard. The idea is that we actually develop something through the work of organizations on the ground in communities that are working together to meet their needs, and that this format would actually be used by those different organizations to help facilitate the exchange of data between what were previously silos. And so we're doing that by supporting specific sets of stakeholders, meaning organizations that actually meet people's needs on a day-to-day basis or have a specific need for this information as a part of in order to do what it is that they do. And we're supporting teams of such stakeholders in specific communities as they use this format, demonstrate the value of all this, and also then in return for them being sort of early adopters, kind of guinea pigs, the decisions that we make in the development of this format are in large part grounded by their feedback. This was an open process, lots of different people chimed in, but ultimately when push came to shove, if there was a disagreement over this or that, we asked the people in the pilot projects, what is it that most fits your needs and most reflects the way you look at the world? And it was their feedback that counted, essentially. And now, what that actually looks like on the ground really varies from place to place, but there are some common patterns. In the District of Columbia, you have a large community anchor institution that provides a lot of services and also maintains a resource directory. And you have the 211 service, which is operated unusually by the government, and which has pretty outdated data and needs up-to-date data from partners like that community anchor institution. And then you have other organizations that maintain resource directories, like the Office of the Public Defender produces like a 500-page resource directory, and some others. And basically, where we have facilitators on the ground helping them figure out what is it that you want to do in the long run? What would success look like for all of these stakeholders? But in the short run, what are specific things that we can do that move us in that direction, that enable data to flow from point A to point B, that enable this organization to collect this information in a way that's easier for them and also then yields reusable output. It really varies depending on the organizations that step up and say, this is what it is that we want to do. And then my role as the organizing officer is I help them raise money, I help with facilitation, I can serve as essentially a consultant, I help recruit volunteers, or even help advise with contracting and that sort of thing. In San Francisco, by comparison, we have a couple different counties that are working on this, and we have different configurations of stakeholders in different counties. The 211 of the Bay Area is actually like a network of county-based 211s, and they're sort of trying to become interoperable among themselves using this format. Whereas the mayor's office of San Francisco identified like 24 different resource directories produced by different agencies, and they're now with a couple of lead agencies showing how they could actually move to a system where all that work to keep track of all the different services that all these different agencies are referring people to, or at least publishing these directories on their own websites, usually in PDF or in Excel, that this can all be essentially coordinated through some sort of common interface, or at least the output of that labor can be transformed into a common output, a standardized output that then potentially 211 could use, or applications like LinkSF, which is here on the call, that they could use. And so the idea is that these pilot projects, you have a set of lead stakeholders who come together and say, okay, we want to do something, and we have networks of civic technologists, often Code for America brigades. In Chicago, I think it's Smart Chicago has been really active in driving this conversation. And they're able to do some work that's like pro bono, helping to do things that normally organizations wouldn't have the time or resources to do themselves. But a smart technical person who wants to help and who's handed clear instructions and a data model and so on and so forth, they could get it done. In some cases, we're doing things pro bono like that. In other cases, we're just helping organizations identify what it is that they want and helping them craft and ask for local funders. And our hypothesis, which is so far proven correct, is that there is a lot of institutional will out there among funders, among governments, and so on, to see this problem get solved in ways that yield interoperable open data, and that if we can make the right asks, if we can articulate very specifically, organization A, B, and C want to do this, this, and this, that there's funding that can actually help accomplish the bigger lifts that the networks of volunteers wouldn't really be able to do reliably. Jeff asks, any examples of efforts working on aggregating, cleaning up, sharing, exposing existing data in this format which might currently be dispersed? Yeah, so great question, Jeff. First I'll frame this a little bit. We have two kinds of pilots that are emerging right now. One is a situation like Chicago, where you have one organization that is pretty diverse, a comprehensive view of the services in their community. Miami is also like this. The 211 in Miami, they've been around forever, they have really good data, they're well trusted, and they're ready to open up. I would say that those are fairly unusual circumstances. Normally it's a network of organizations that produce data in silos, and there isn't necessarily one organization that everybody knows has good data. There's strengths and weaknesses all around, and those are two very different scenarios from our perspective. If you have one organization that is, they can be a centralized hub and they're ready to open up, like Chicago or Miami, it's a lot quicker to demonstrate the value of what it is that we're talking about. Whereas in DC and San Francisco, where we have, and probably most other places, you have a number of organizations, some of whom have like competing interests and different ways of collecting and using this data, and they're much more challenging environments, and I think also much more important environments in which to demonstrate that, even though this is all data being collected in different ways and used in different ways, it's about the same information and it can actually be shared. And so the short answer is we are engaged in that work, and the road is going to be long. We are dedicating most of the technology development efforts that we're going to have over this year, in large part through Code for America and other sponsors, towards developing the means to produce among a collaborative network of stakeholders reliable data, essentially editing and validation tools. We don't have them yet. We're looking for great opportunities in which to actually pair developers up with networks of people who want to work together to produce this information, and we're looking for examples. So this is going to be the big hill that we have to climb over the next year, which is also why I'm excited to hear folks from Chicago on the line, because there in Chicago, it may actually be a lot easier to put the pieces together because you have this vendor that's simply opening up their database. Questions about the pilots in particular? I would love to talk with the Chicago people a little bit about how they currently structure and use resource directory data. And I also feel like we probably have about 10, 12 minutes left, and then we'll let everybody go. So go ahead. Who wants to chime in? Any questions or stories about how this works in your own community? I think, yeah, the Illinois legal aid folks, as I understand it, many legal service providers, or in many communities, the legal services are monitored by an organization that uses a platform called Pro Bono Net through the Law Help.
We don't.
And that, I think, is different in Illinois. Is that right?
That is very different in Illinois. We do not use Law Help or Pro Bono Net. We have built our own system, and we have a directory, a referral system in our current website. It's written in Cold Fusion. Uses a Microsoft SQL Server backend. It is not built on any particular standard, but we are about 3 or 4 months into moving everything to Drupal. And in doing that, we've been looking at the Open Referral standard and actually building our new version of our directory and referral system off of that standard. And then we'll do a data migration. And it's actually my hope that we'll be able to produce something in Drupal that we can share with everybody else.
Yeah. And so, I think I know some stuff, but for the context of other people, tell us about the information that you collect and that you maintain in there.
Oh, yeah. Well, we ask, the organization name, their description, the languages they speak, what legal practice areas they serve, what are their basic eligibility criteria, their locations,
right?
And we're looking to expand on that. And with some organizations where they're actually allowed to, well, we've actually opened up the ability for individuals to apply online for services, then we have additional information. Right. And we're hoping to integrate everything into this new referral platform in the new website, which will be done in about another year.
Okay. So I can riff a little bit on what I'm hearing from Gwendolyn and the Illinois Legal Aid, to give a sense of the kinds of questions that we ask and the kinds of possibilities that we pursue. Here we have an organization that is a trusted monitor of legal service providers throughout Illinois, and you collect all that information. It's at significant cost to yourselves. You want to find more ways to use it. Obviously, getting people to come to your website is one way, but there's a lot of other ways in which that information could be used that wouldn't necessarily, that would benefit from that information being on site somewhere else, right? Being accessible in some other app. Potentially even the application that I heard you're interested in developing. If your information is available via API, if it's open and external systems can read it automatically, then it might be easier for you to develop a new application that stands alone, that doesn't have to be incorporated into another system that was designed for some other purpose. And you would then be able to automatically pull from your own information. At the same time, other legal service providers say that are using Legal Server. Ivy was on the call earlier. He had to jump off. He's the technology guy for Legal Server, which is a case management system for legal service providers. And this is all, currently Legal Server clients have to manage this information manually, which many don't. And if a Legal Server client in Illinois is able to, through within their case management environment, sort of automatically get information from your database without even necessarily knowing that it's coming from this totally other database. It just sort of appears to them when they need it. Then that's a great benefit to Legal Server's clients and Legal Server itself. Our work in Open Referral is not just trying to make those things happen in and of themselves. We're also asking the question of how can these models of open data exchange be sustainable? Because it's not just about getting data and opening it. We know that we have to be able to speak to the bottom line in brokering value propositions that ensure that the organizations that are currently producing this data have the resources they need to continue to produce that data. And that could look like a lot of different things. It could look like agreements for data sharing, where if people are going to use your resource directory data, then in exchange you have access to information about how they've used it, right? That might be valuable. Or there might even be some ways in which organizations can say, we have a resource directory here and we're going to open it up for basic access, but if you want to be able to do these kinds of searches or have these kinds of value-added services offered on top of it, there's essentially a fee that enables us to recoup the cost. And we're exploring those kinds of possibilities, essentially facilitating those conversations. So for example, in Chicago, I suspect that Purple Binder might be thrilled to have access to your resource directory and to no longer have to maintain essentially their own duplicative set of information about those services. And that might be valuable for you. You all may be able to find some sort of reciprocal value that this common language essentially enables. So again, to recap, we don't expect that this will answer all the questions. It's a start to a new conversation about how to answer these questions. So, any questions about that before we? I want to wrap us up well before the hour is out. And of course, I can do follow-ups with each of you individually, or set up follow-up conversations with subgroups. But before I sort of wrap this up, any final questions or suggestions? Okay, so a few. Hello? Oh, hello? I lost y'all for a second, but I think
You're back.
I lost y'all for a second. I'm back. All right. Whew. Sorry about that. I don't know what happened. So a few things. First of all, we have a community group, the Open Referral Forum. I'm going to paste the link into the chat box here. And if you're not in there, please join. Introduce yourself. After that, we also have the specification is online. We're, it's at a sort of stable state at this point, but we still want people taking a look at it and letting us know, like, this is what they need to be able to understand it better, to be able to use it, so on and so forth. And I'm also able to consult with folks who might want to pursue specific courses of action in your own community. And so, especially the Chicago folks, there's a conversation happening, I think, every week. There's an OpenGov Hack Night, and I would love to start connecting the dots between the legal aid folks in Chicago and the other folks who are thinking about this with Purple Binder and Smart Chicago and so on. In the meantime, any other questions? I'm easy to reach, and I think I appreciate y'all's time, and we'll be doing more of these in the future. But I also host regular assemblies where we go a little bit more in depth into some of this, into some of the technical topics. Any final questions? Cool. Jeff and Nicole, I haven't really talked with you all. If you want to follow up and have a conversation among the three of us about how this might work in upstate New York, I'd be happy to do so. I do have a few leads. Nothing strong, but I've just been waiting for the right opportunity to start those conversations.
Yeah, I'd like to do that, Greg. Thanks.
Cool. All right, y'all. And Gwendolyn, I'll definitely be following up with you. It sounds like we have a lot to talk about.
Okay.
Cool. All right, thanks so much.
Thank you. Have a good weekend.
All right, bye, y'all.